Today we're bringing a legend to life in 1/43 scale. 1977, AJ Foyt wins the Indianapolis 500 for a record fourth time driving his own car, the iconic Coyote. This classic kit from SMTS is of that car, and this video shows how to build it. This isn't a Tamiya shake the box and it's done deal, we're talking old school white metal and the challenges that come with that to capture a piece of Indianapolis history. These English SMTS kits are, like Tamiya from Italy, a throwback to old school craftsmanship. Hand-cast metal bodies, wire axles, vac form windshield and water slide decoration. This kit includes some photo etch, rubber tyres, plus plated suspension and engine parts and plated wheels. Instructions? Just a single sheet with an exploded diagram identifying all the pieces and how they fit together. There's also a build order, and unlike any kit I've built in the past, the part numbers reflect the order of assembly. I think that's a great feature and really helps the builder understand what they're doing. First up, cleanup. White metal kits of this vintage aren't precision moulded like modern kits in resin or plastic. You need to sand and file away casting seams, burrs and extra flash. I use a combination of files and sanding sticks to gently fettle the parts into shape. Patience is key here, especially near the edges of a part because it's very easy to accidentally round them off. The overall proportions of the main monocoque casting look okay, but there was a lot of crud hanging off it, such as around the front wheel deflectors and the front flanks of the tub. Flash around the inside of the cockpit and engine bay was removed with a file. It's hard to see because the casting is messy, but tiny letters that spell out Ford are cast into the valve covers. As far as parts fit is concerned, this was the most significant issue in the whole build. See the gap? The upper cockpit surround casting did not fit down flush on the chassis. The front tip of the cockpit should not be stepped up like seen here, but flush with the top surface. The parts fit for everything else was, though, in general, pretty good. Part of the preparation process is drilling out mounting holes, in this case for the front suspension, the mirror and rollover bar, and also the rear axle. I made the holes in the gearbox and rear hubs a little oversized to allow for some adjustment if needed later on. Some of the panel lines were rescribed to keep them visible once the paint went on. It's important to test fit all the main pieces for this type of kit prior to painting to check clearances and ensure it will all actually go together later on. If you're going to attach a model to a base, get that settled before painting and assembly. I've got a piece of MDF cut to size and painted grey with a couple of holes drilled where I want the screws to come through and pick up the chassis plate. Small washers act as spacers to set the ride height. I was aiming to get the model nice and low with a bit of rake to replicate how the car looks when on the racetrack. The problem is, when the model is this low to achieve a realistic ride height, there's not enough clearance for the front tyres to be mounted on the rims. So you'll see later I had to go with extra washers. Metal needs proper priming, otherwise paint won't stick very well. All the parts were sanded to remove surface corrosion, then mounted on clips and hit with Tamiya's grey surface primer. Liquid primer was brushed on to fill porosities and any sinks or scratches. Just remember, this stuff takes a long time to dry, so give it a good day to cure before sanding. Once happy with the finish of the grey parts, a quick coat of Tamiya's pink primer was applied to everything that was to receive the orange body colour. I use pink primer under reds and oranges because it keeps the final colour more vibrant. After another light sanding to smooth out any texture, it was time for colour. Now, the Coyotes wore a bright, iconic what Foyt describes as poppy red. I eyeballed a custom mix of SMS paints until I got something that was close to what photographs show. I used Vermilion Fire, which is a Ford colour, as the base, then added a touch of Salamanca Red, a GM Holden colour, until I got something I was happy with. A few light coats and a heavier wet coat did the trick, though it did come out a little bit orange peely, but some time with micromesh and polishing compounds buffed most of that out. Various metallic colours were used on the engine and gearbox. The rear springs were painted SMS silver, then acrylic semi-gloss black, which was wiped off to expose the silver underneath. The Ford lettering in the cam covers has been scraped with a hobby knife to re-expose the metal, but it's a bit hard to read. The wheels are nicely cast and plated to replicate the polished aluminium of the real rims. The car ran a few different wheel designs, and the ones supplied in the kit required blackouts in the spokes. These were hand-painted semi-gloss black, plus a little black panel line wash, then the excess wiped off the raised surfaces with a cotton tip. All 4 rubber tyres had the tread surfaces sanded to remove the moulding line, then cleaned and mounted on the rims. Masks were cut from tape to fit over the rim, so the sidewall could be sprayed gloss clear to improve adhesion for the tyre decals. But when I dipped the decal sheet in water, I could not believe what I was seeing. The letters that made up the Goodyear logos started floating around on the backing paper. Every tyre decal broke into multiple pieces that had to be carefully reassembled back into a Goodyear logo once on the sidewall. I was able to reassemble the rears reasonably well, but the front tyres were a disaster, especially when some of the individual letters started to break apart as well. Once the decals had dried, the tyres were sprayed with Tamiya Smoke Clear that had a drop of flat base added to it. Once the masks were removed, I think they turned out okay, considering what had happened. But what to do with the rest of the decals? Microscale's liquid decal film once again saved the day, just like it had with the Watson Roadster build. Link is in the description. A quick coat brushed on the decal sheet. While they were drying, the 2 side cooler towers were fixed to the main chassis with 2-part epoxy glue. Aluminium colour was brushed inside the cockpit and the inner panels of the tub. There were no real issues with the rest of the decal application, other than some softener needed to help the small ones settle on the curved surfaces of the rear cooling pods. I must say the registration of the decals is very poor, and some of the smaller ones are not readable. And the big G on the nose, the white is a little translucent, you can see the orange coming through, and check out the varying thickness of the keyline around the outside edge. Not good. I was under pressure to get this model done for our club's display at the Australian Model Expo, and with life taking up more time than it should, I had to cut corners and decided not to clear the body parts. So once the body decals were on, it was straight into assembly. And this is where the dry fit checks from earlier pay off, as most of the assembly was pretty straightforward. The lower rear suspension arms are epoxy glued to the floor and gearbox. The rear uprights and top links get CA glued in place, and the rear axle is used to locate everything. The lower front suspension arms are a neat fit, sandwiched between the base plate and the upper chassis casting. And this is where it starts looking like a race car, because the seat and dashboard can drop in, epoxy glued in place, followed by the gear shift and steering wheel. The coolers in the side towers are photo etch pieces with just a dab of CA glue so they can't fall out. The plated intake plenum, turbo and rear wing supports are sitting in place here. If nothing else, this photo shows how little protection the drivers had in those days, because the monocoque is very shallow and the cockpit surround was nothing more than flimsy bodywork. The bracing structure to mount the rear wing was manufactured with a twist in it. I tried to bend it straight but felt it was going to break, so an option was to scratch build something out of brass rod, but that presented 2 problems. 1, I've never worked with brass rod, and 2, I was out of time and had to get this thing finished. No seatbelts were included, so I made some tiny shoulder straps made from strips of paper painted flat black, then stuck to the seat. The kit screw for the back of the model was not long enough, so this is a replacement that taps into the engine cover and sandwiches all the engine components in place. The chassis base plate has been sprayed SMS aluminium. I should have put more of that under here, as I'm pretty sure it would not have been poppy red overspray. The front uprights, brake calipers and discs were brush painted various metallic colours to provide some contrast to the detail. All the suspension arms are plated and are as supplied in the kit. To try and bring the front ride height down a little, I flat spotted the front tyres, just taking a little bit off using a sanding stick. I also drilled the inside mounting holes in the wheels a little oversized for extra clearance on the axle, and I reckon these tweaks allowed the nose to drop close to a full millimetre. Using 2-part epoxy to glue the wheels to the axles gives a few minutes of work time to ensure the wheels point straight ahead and that the cambers look okay. The radiator mesh piece across the front was not painted, that's just Tamiya panel line wash applied directly to the metal prior to fitting. A thin aluminium strip ran across the bottom of the nose on the real car. An etch part is provided for this, but it has to be bent, so into the photo etch bender, then fitted in place with crystal clear, a water-based adhesive that dries clear. Each little piece of detail adds more character. The rubber joiners on the intake plenum and turbo pipes were brush painted a mix of orange and flat red, and the headrest semi-gloss black. Everything on the exhaust side of the turbo was painted gunmetal, while the plated finish was retained for everything on the intake side. Photo etch end plates have been glued to the wing, and the alignment is purely by eye as there are no locating tabs or pins. The clear piece is the vac-formed windscreen, and that takes a lot of careful cutting and filing to create a windshield that can glue to the top edge of the cockpit with a dab of crystal clear. I mentioned earlier about the twisted rear wing mount. Well, this is how twisted if the wing was to mount as intended. But I braced the wing flat until the glue had dried, and it now sits about where it should be. The chrome roll hoop has also been fixed in place. This shows the extra washers between the model and plinth, and I think the model has just been manufactured too high. It's not an assembly issue. The kit does include material for the side skirts, but it's glued to the bottom edge of the chassis, which is covered in decal material, and I didn't want to risk wrecking the decoration, so I left the skirts off. So there it is, the 1977 Coyote, reborn in 1/43rd scale, in tribute to one of Indy's greatest moments, and it's one of my favourites on the Indy 500 winner shelf in the display cabinet. I have more classic race car builds coming up, so subscribe so you don't miss those. And if you've built a white metal kit yourself, let me know in the comments. Love to hear what you've done. Oh, the animal. The model was part of my local club's display at Model Expo, and our theme was Animal Instinct. A model could be of anything as long as some type of animal was part of its name. Wile E Coyote has nothing to do with Coyote race cars. I purchased the 3D files from the Colts website for a couple of dollars, then a fellow club member printed the parts. Thank you, Max. Once it had been left in the sun for the UV to cure the resin, it was put together with CA glue, then hit with a single coat of grey primer. My stock of paint colours does not lend itself to figures, so I played around with some Tamiya flat acrylic mixers and ended up with this, which sort of looks something like the cartoon, making for a point of difference in my collection of race cars. Now you can go and like and subscribe. Cheers.
It's all over. AJ has done it. He has won his 4th Indianapolis 500.
There it is, the greatest lane in the state of Indiana, Victory Lane at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.